Mohammed Fahad, please leave the recruitment packet on the desk.
Those employees made their own choices inside their own company.
The government says you contacted the Bot 4 worker first.
To the AT&T employees he recruited, Mohammed Fahad was just a contact on Facebook offering easy money. To federal investigators, he was the architect of a $200 million fraud that corrupted nearly 2 million phones and buried malware inside one of America's largest telecom networks.
A message is not control.
Then you paid that worker and asked for more insiders.
You're making introductions sound like command.
He would not get another chance to disappear. Within 72 hours, U.S. federal agents in Hong Kong would begin the paperwork to ship him back to the Western District of Washington to answer for a 7-year cyber fraud conspiracy that had hollowed out one of the largest telecom companies in the world. 1,900,033 phones, $200 million in losses. A Facebook message sent in 2012 that grew into custom malware sitting inside AT&T's own network. What began as a whisper to a single call center employee in Bothell, Washington ended with an international extradition, a federal indictment, and a Seattle courtroom waiting for its verdict. Real talk. Have you ever gotten a random message from a stranger offering you money for something you could do at your job? Drop that story in the comments. Subscribe if you're new here. We cover cases like this every week, and this one only gets stranger from here. Mohammed Fahad was born in Karachi, Pakistan, in 1985. His father worked in import-export logistics along the Karachi port. His mother taught primary school in a neighborhood called Gulshan-e-Iqbal, a middle-class district known for its bookstores, its cricket grounds, and its proximity to Karachi University. Fahad was the middle of 3 sons. Neighbors would later describe him as quiet, obsessive about electronics, and always taking things apart. By the time he was 10 years old, Fahad had disassembled and reassembled every landline phone in his family's apartment. By 14, he was repairing mobile phones for classmates in exchange for pocket money. He had a soldering iron, a magnifying lamp, and a small notebook of circuit diagrams he had copied from library books. He was not a strong student in the traditional subjects. His teachers described him in report cards as distracted, unfocused on core studies, and unusually gifted in applied electronics. One instructor wrote that Fahad had the mind of an engineer trapped in a classroom that did not know what to do with him. At 17, Fahad left secondary school without completing his final year. He took a job at a mobile phone repair shop in Sadar Bazaar, one of the largest electronics markets in Karachi. He earned the equivalent of $40 a week. But he learned everything. He learned how phones were locked to carriers. He learned how they were unlocked. He learned which chips could be reflashed, which firmwares could be modified, and which authentication systems the major global networks used. By 20, he was known in the bazaar as one of the best unlockers in the district. The unlocking trade was legal in Pakistan. Customers walked in with phones bought overseas, and Fahad freed them from foreign carriers so they could accept a Pakistani SIM card. He worked long hours, saved his money, and rented a small storefront of his own by the age of 22. But Fahad was ambitious. He watched the global smartphone market explode. He watched Apple release the iPhone. He watched carriers in the United States and Europe subsidize devices in exchange for 2-year contracts, locking the phones to their networks until every installment had been paid. He watched an entire secondary market emerge for unlocked devices, sold at premium prices in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. He also watched something else. He watched the security systems that carriers use to protect those locks. He studied them. He read technical forums late into the night. He learned that the weakest link in any lock system was not the code. It was the human being with credentials to unlock it. In 2010, Fahad obtained citizenship in Grenada through the country's investor program. The passport gave him easier travel to a wider range of countries. He began flying frequently between Karachi, Dubai, and Hong Kong. He met contacts in the wholesale electronics trade. He rented an apartment in Hong Kong's Kowloon district and began operating a small import-export business on paper. By 2012, he was 27 years old, running a legitimate front business, holding 2 passports and looking for something bigger. He had the technical knowledge. He had the international mobility. He had the money to move quickly. What he needed was someone on the inside of AT&T. To understand what Fahd built, you have to understand how AT&T's phone unlocking system actually worked. In 2012, AT&T was the second largest wireless carrier in the United States, serving over 100 million subscribers. Customers who bought a smartphone from AT&T typically paid a subsidized price upfront, often around $200 for a device that retailed for $600 or $700, in exchange for a 2-year service contract. The phone itself was locked to AT&T's network. It could not accept a SIM card from any other carrier until the customer had completed the contract and paid the device off in full. At that point, the customer could contact AT&T and request an unlock code. If they qualified, meaning the account was in good standing, the phone was paid off, and the request came from the legitimate account holder, an AT&T representative would generate a code, enter it into an internal system, and the device would be released. The system that generated those codes was called the Customer Unlock Portal. It was accessed through internal AT&T terminals by trained customer service representatives. Each transaction was logged. Each unlock was tied to an employee identification number. The largest cluster of employees with unlock authority worked at AT&T's call center in Bothell, Washington. Bothell is a suburb of Seattle, tucked into the wooded hills northeast of the city. The call center was a low, sprawling building set behind a parking lot off North Creek Parkway. Roughly 1,500 employees worked there across 3 shifts. Many were young. Many were college students or recent graduates. Some had been hired directly out of high school. Starting wages ranged from $15 to $18 an hour, with modest health benefits and the promise of upward mobility inside the company. For most of these employees, the job was routine. They handled billing disputes. They processed upgrades. They walked frustrated customers through voicemail settings, and a small subset of them, the ones with the highest clearance, could unlock phones. That authority was the vulnerability. A single employee sitting at a single terminal could unlock a device in under 30 seconds. If they entered a phone's IMEI number, its unique 15-digit identifier, and clicked through the internal prompts, the device was freed. There was no second approval. There was no manager sign-off. There was no automatic flag for suspicious volume. The system relied on trust. It relied on the assumption that employees with credentials would use them only for legitimate customers. That trust was about to be tested. The first Facebook message went out in April 2012. Fahd was working from a laptop in his Hong Kong apartment. He had spent weeks scraping public LinkedIn profiles and Facebook accounts of employees who listed AT&T's Bothell call center as their workplace. He identified a young man in his early 20s who had posted publicly about his frustration with his salary, his complaints about bills, and his interest in gaming and consumer electronics. Fahd created a fake profile, a woman's name, a stock photo, a plausible location, and sent a message asking whether the employee might be interested in an opportunity to make extra money using his existing job. The employee responded within an hour. Within 2 weeks, they had moved off Facebook and onto encrypted messaging. Fahd offered $2,000 per unlock. He would send lists of IMEI numbers, sometimes 20 at a time, sometimes 100, and the employee would enter them into AT&T's customer unlock portal during his regular shifts. Payment would come through a wire transfer to a bank account the employee was instructed to open using a fabricated business name. The first payment cleared in May 2012. It was for $14,000. The employee then did what Fahd asked next. He recruited coworkers. He identified friends at the call center who had unlocked credentials, who had money troubles, who might be receptive. He introduced them to the businesswoman in Hong Kong, who could quietly supplement their paychecks. By the end of 2012, at least 3 Bothell employees were on Fahd's payroll. By 2013, the network had grown to 5. By 2014, it was 6. Each employee was assigned to a fictitious consulting firm. Names like Swift Unlock Consulting, Bothell Tech Solutions, Northwest Wireless Data, And each firm had a bank account, a fake invoice template, and a plausible cover story for why they were receiving international wire transfers. FAHD's instructions were meticulous. Each invoice had to list a service. Each service had to have a rate. Each rate had to correspond to a plausible number of hours worked. The invoices were, on paper, indistinguishable from any small consulting engagement. The operation ran quietly for the first 2 years. Then it exploded. In late 2013, AT&T began tightening its unlock system. The company introduced new controls, additional prompts, additional verification steps, additional logging. For a few weeks, the volume of fraudulent unlocks dropped. FAHD's employees complained. They said the system was harder to game. They said transactions were now generating alerts they had not seen before. Fahad's response changed the nature of the entire scheme. He instructed one of his most trusted insiders to install custom software on AT&T's internal computers. He sent the employee a USB drive containing a bespoke piece of malware, a keylogger, a network scanner, and a remote access tool combined into a single package. The employee walked into the Bothell call center on a Tuesday morning, plugged the drive into his workstation, and executed the installer. The malware began quietly harvesting employee credentials. It mapped the internal architecture of AT&T's unlock system. It opened a persistent backdoor that allowed Fahad, sitting at a laptop 7,000 miles away in Pakistan, to unlock phones directly without needing an employee to sit at a terminal at all. The scheme had crossed a line. It was no longer bribery. It was a full network intrusion. By 2015, Fahad was unlocking phones at a rate his human insiders could never have matched. 10,000 a week, 15,000 a week. Batch scripts ran overnight, processing IMEI lists uploaded from resellers in Hong Kong, Dubai, and Karachi. AT&T's forensic team would later determine that between 2012 and 2018, 1,900,033 phones were fraudulently unlocked through this operation. The total loss to AT&T in subsidized device costs, unpaid contracts, and system remediation exceeded $200 million. No one at Bothell noticed. No one at the corporate level noticed. Not for years. We're heading into the investigation now. If you want to know exactly how AT&T finally caught what was happening inside their own network, subscribe. We break down every detail of how this unraveled, and the ending will surprise you. The catalyst was not a phone call. It was not a whistleblower. It was a spreadsheet. In early 2017, a mid-level analyst in AT&T's fraud division was running a quarterly review of unlock activity by region. She was looking for statistical anomalies, regions with unusually high volumes, employee IDs with disproportionate throughput, IMEI batches that traced back to devices which had never been fully paid off. Her name will not appear in this script. She was doing her job. But when she pulled the data for the Bothell call center, something on her screen did not add up. A single cluster of employee identification numbers at Bothell had authorized unlock transactions at a volume roughly 40 times higher than the national average. One employee ID had processed more unlocks in a single Tuesday than most representatives processed in a month. The IMEI numbers on those unlocked phones traced back to accounts that were, statistically, impossible. Accounts opened in California, unlocked in Washington, tied to phones that had shipped to wholesale buyers in Hong Kong. The analyst flagged the data. She wrote a 2-page memo. She sent it up the chain. AT&T's corporate security team began a quiet internal review. They did not tip off the employees. They pulled login logs. They pulled workstation event logs. They pulled physical access records showing who had entered the Bothell facility on which days and at which hours. What they found terrified them. The workstations at Bothell were running unauthorized software, custom software. Software that had been installed by employees using their own credentials and was quietly communicating with servers located outside the United States. The software was harvesting credentials. It was creating hidden accounts inside AT&T's internal systems. It was generating unlock codes at a scale that could only be described as industrial. This was not a case of a few employees taking bribes. This was an active, ongoing intrusion into a Fortune 20 company's network infrastructure. AT&T contacted the FBI. The Bureau's cybercrime division opened a case out of the Seattle field office in the spring of 2017. Agents were assigned. Subpoenas went out. Bank records were pulled. Encrypted messaging accounts were quietly monitored. The name that kept surfacing was the alias FOD had used since 2012. A woman's name, a Hong Kong location, and a set of shell companies with matching signatures on their bank paperwork. For the first time in 5 years, someone was watching him back. The FBI investigation ran quietly for 18 months. Agents built a case slowly, methodically, without tipping off the network. They began with the money. The shell companies, Swift Unlock Consulting, Bothell Tech Solutions, Northwest Wireless Data, and several others, had bank accounts at 3 different U.S. financial institutions. Every deposit into those accounts had originated from a wire transfer initiated in Hong Kong or Pakistan. Every one of those wires was tied, eventually, to a set of accounts controlled by a Grenadian passport holder named Mohammed Fahd. They pulled the encrypted messages. Federal agents worked with international counterparts to obtain communications between Fahdi and his Bothell insiders. The messages read like a corporate operations manual. There were spreadsheets tracking IMEI batches. There were payment schedules. There were internal memos about system upgrades that referred, on second reading, to malware deployment. One exchange, dated November 2014, would later be introduced at trial. FAHD, November 8, 2014. The new version is ready. Install tonight after your shift. Do not use the same USB as last time. Discard it in a public location afterward. Insider, November 8, 2014. Understood. I have access to the terminal in Section 4B. Camera is broken there. FAHD, November 9, 2014. Good. Confirm when installation is complete. Payment doubled for this deployment. Insider, November 9, 2014. Done. It's running. I can see the process in Task Manager. FAHD, November 9, 2014. Kill the visible process. It should be running as a system service. If you see it in Task Manager, we have a problem. They pulled the technical evidence. FBI computer forensics analysts, working alongside AT&T's security team, recovered the malware itself. It was a custom-built toolkit, not off the shelf, not repurposed from criminal marketplaces. Someone had written it specifically for AT&T's Unlock system. Someone had studied the internal architecture in detail. They pulled the physical evidence. Search warrants executed at the homes of 3 cooperating insiders recovered USB drives, encrypted laptops, handwritten notes with IMEI lists, and in one case, a small notebook documenting every payment received over 4 years. The smoking gun was the malware source code. Deep inside the compiled binary, forensic analysts recovered a debug string, a stray line of text left by the developer during compilation, that included a file path referencing a directory on a laptop in Karachi. That laptop and the IP address it operated from were quietly tracked. In April 2017, a federal grand jury in the Western District of Washington returned a sealed indictment naming Mohammed Fahd on multiple counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, computer fraud, and identity theft. Fahdi had no idea. He was still unlocking phones from his Karachi office. Mohammed Fahd was arrested on February 4, 2018, in the lobby of a 5-star hotel in Hong Kong's Central District. He had flown in from Karachi 3 days earlier for what he believed was a legitimate business meeting. His schedule that morning included breakfast with a wholesale electronics buyer, followed by a walk to a nearby office building to sign a shipping contract. He never made it to the office. At approximately 10:14 a.m. local time, 4 Hong Kong police force officers, accompanied by a legal attaché from the U.S. consulate, approached him as he crossed the hotel lobby toward the elevator bank. The lead officer identified himself in English and Cantonese and asked Fahd to confirm his identity. Fahd handed over his Grenadian passport. The officer read the name aloud, closed the passport, and said, "Mr. Fahd, there is a provisional arrest warrant issued at the request of the United States government. You will need to come with us. Fahad's face did not change. According to the officer's later reports, his first words were measured. Fahad, there must be a mistake. I am a businessman. What is this regarding? Officer, the details will be explained at the station. Please cooperate. Fahad, I would like to contact my attorney. Officer, you will be given that opportunity once you are processed. Fahad, may I take my briefcase? Officer, the briefcase will be inventoried and returned to you if there is nothing of evidentiary interest. Fahad stood still for a long moment. Hotel guests moved around him. A concierge glanced over, then looked away. He set the briefcase down on the polished marble floor, slowly, and placed his hands where the officers could see them. He did not speak again in the lobby. He was walked out through the service corridor and driven to a Hong Kong detention facility. Within 72 hours, he had waived extradition, though his lawyers would later contest that decision. He would spend more than a year in Hong Kong custody before being transferred to the United States in August 2019. His last words to the arresting officers, recorded in the transport van as they left the hotel, were, "I need to speak to my family." Mohammed Fahad was extradited to the United States on August 2, 2019, and transferred to federal custody in the Western District of Washington. His initial appearance was in front of a U.S. magistrate judge in Seattle. He was denied bail. He was assigned a federal public defender, then later retained private counsel, an experienced white-collar defense team out of Seattle. His attorneys moved to suppress the intercepted communications. They moved to challenge the extradition. They moved to exclude the technical evidence. Each motion was denied. On September 2, 2020, Mohammed Fahad pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud before U.S. District Judge Robert S. Lasnik. In his plea agreement, Fahad admitted that he had orchestrated the scheme, had recruited AT&T employees through bribery and threats, had directed the installation of malware on AT&T's network, and had personally profited from the unlocking of nearly 2 million devices. Sentencing was scheduled for the following year. The Department of Justice submitted a memorandum outlining the scope of the harm. AT&T's forensic report was submitted as an exhibit. 3 of Fahad's cooperating insiders had already pleaded guilty and received sentences ranging from 12 to 18 months. Fahad himself faced a sentencing guideline range that federal prosecutors argued should be capped at the statutory maximum for the charges. Victim impact statements were filed by AT&T's corporate security division. One passage stood out. This defendant did not merely defraud our company. He weaponized the trust we placed in our own employees. He turned young people who had come to work at our call center for a living wage into felons. He installed persistent malicious software inside a critical piece of American communications infrastructure. The damage extends beyond the $200 million in direct loss. It extends to every employee he corrupted and every system he compromised. Judge Robert S. Lasnik delivered his sentencing statement on September 16, 2021, in a federal courtroom in Seattle. He addressed Fahad directly. Mr. Fahad, this was a sophisticated, prolonged, and calculated criminal enterprise. You did not stumble into this. You built it. When bribery alone stopped working, you escalated to a network intrusion of a scale and duration that this court has rarely seen. You corrupted young employees who trusted you. You caused harm not only to the corporate victim, but to every person you drew into your scheme. The court finds no meaningful basis for a downward departure. Judge Lasnik sentenced Mohammed Fahad to 144 months, 12 years in federal prison. He ordered restitution of $200,620,698, payable to AT&T. He recommended designation to a medium-security federal correctional institution, and Fahad was subsequently designated to FCI Sheridan in Oregon, with a projected release year of 2030. His Grenadian passport was surrendered. His accounts were frozen. The Bothell call center underwent a full security overhaul, and the workstations he had compromised were pulled offline and forensically imaged before being destroyed. The Facebook message that started it all was recovered, still archived, in an FBI evidence locker. This case was calculated, but the case on the right-hand side is on a completely different level. Click it now.